I'm sitting in my kitchen, staring at a cup of cold coffee. My hands are still shaking after the scene Raymond and Tracy made half an hour ago. My son's words are still ringing in my ears, as if he never stopped shouting. I've lived for 72 years, and I've never experienced such humiliation from my own child. A thin film has formed on the coffee in my cup, and I mechanically stir it with a spoon, which clinks against the porcelain walls with a quiet, almost melodic sound. Outside my kitchen window, rare clouds float over Dallas, and I involuntarily remember how Harold loved to sit in this same spot in the mornings, reading the newspaper and sipping coffee. My late husband never raised his voice, even when he was very upset. He knew how to solve problems calmly and judiciously, weighing every word before he spoke. If he had heard his only son talking to me today, he would surely have turned over in his grave. Harold always said that family is sacred, but respect must be mutual, regardless of age and family ties. 3 years ago, when Harold passed away, I thought things couldn't get any worse. We had lived together for 48 years, and suddenly I found myself completely alone in that big house on Maple Street. Raymond came to the funeral with his wife and stayed for a few days after the wake. He said he was worried about me, that it wasn't good for an old person to live alone, especially after such a loss. His words sounded sincere, and I saw genuine concern in his eyes, which warmed my broken heart. "Mom, maybe we should stay for a week," he suggested, hugging me around the shoulders in the living room, where bouquets of flowers from the funeral still stood. "You understand that Dad's death is a shock to all of us. We also need time to come to terms with the loss." I agreed because it was really hard. The empty room seemed even bigger than usual, and the silence weighed heavily on my shoulders. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside the window made me flinch. Tracy seemed sympathetic and even helped me sort through Harold's belongings, carefully packing them into boxes for charity. She was tactful and careful, not asking unnecessary questions when I paused, holding his favorite shirt or old reading glasses in my hands. "Marjorie, take your time," she said gently when she saw that I was having a hard time parting with his things. "You can do it gradually when you're ready. No one is forcing you to get rid of everything at once." A week turned into a month. Raymond explained that he needed time to find a suitable job in Dallas, since they had previously lived in Houston. He had been fired from his job as a sales manager 6 months before Harold's death, and the family was getting by on odd jobs. Tracy worked at a beauty salon, but there weren't many customers, and the pay was low. She often complained that the salon owner exploited her employees, forcing them to work overtime for pennies. "You know, Mom," Tracy would say to me as she wiped the plates after dinner and neatly arranged them in the cupboard, "maybe it's fate that we ended up here right now. You need support, and we need stability. It's a win-win, you know? We'll help you cope with loneliness, and you'll give us time to get on our feet." At the time, those words seemed reasonable. I really did feel lost without Harold, and having my family around eased the pain of loss a little. Besides, Raymond was my only child, and after so many years of separation, I wanted to be closer to him. We rarely saw each other when he lived in Houston, once a year on Thanksgiving, sometimes at Christmas. Phone calls were also infrequent, usually on holidays or when he was in financial trouble. A month turned into 6 months. Raymond still hadn't found a permanent job, although he claimed to be actively looking. Sometimes he managed to get a short-term contract, a day or two working as a mover or helping a friend with a move. But the money quickly ran out. Tracy got a job at a local salon on the outskirts of town, but complained that the owner was nitpicky and cut her pay for any reason. Every evening, she came home tired and irritated, talking about capricious customers and unfair demands from her boss. "Marjorie," Tracy said to me one day, as we sat in the living room watching the evening news, You understand that it's very expensive to maintain such a large house. Utility bills, repairs, property taxes. Maybe we should think about selling it and buying something smaller? An apartment or a small house in the suburbs? I didn't understand what she was getting at. I naively thought that Tracy was concerned about my expenses out of good intentions. The house was indeed large: 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a living room with a fireplace. Harold bought it 30 years ago when his construction business took off, and we dreamed that our grandchildren would grow up here. We imagined the children running through the long hallways, playing in the large yard, and gathering with the whole family for holiday meals in the dining room. The grandchildren never came. Raymond married Tracy quite late, at the age of 38, and they never had children. Tracy always found excuses. Her career was more important. The timing wasn't right. They needed to save money first. Her health wouldn't allow it. Now she is 42, and the subject of grandchildren has become painful for all of us. I stopped asking about it, seeing how Raymond's face tensed up when the conversation turned to children. 6 months turned into a year. Raymond even stopped looking for work, explaining that the job market was in crisis and that at his age it was almost impossible to find anything worthwhile. He was 44, an age when many men are at the peak of their careers, but my son preferred to sit at home, play computer games, and complain about the unfairness of life. He could talk for hours about how employers discriminate against people his age, how young university graduates are replacing experienced professionals, and how the country's economy is falling into an abyss. Mom, you have no idea what's going on in the job market right now, he said, without looking up from his computer screen. Hundreds of people are applying for every job opening. Employers want to pay pennies for full-time work. It's better to wait until the situation stabilizes than to settle for the first job that comes along. That's when the hints began that I should help the family financially. At first, it looked like requests for small loans: for gas for the car, for groceries, for medicine for Tracy, who suddenly began to suffer from migraines and back pain. I gave money without asking too many questions because I considered it my duty. Raymond was my son, and if he was having temporary difficulties, who else would help him but his mother? But the loans were never repaid, and the requests became more frequent and larger. Tracy began to speak openly about how older people spend money irrationally, buying unnecessary things and medicines that greedy doctors prescribe them just to make more money. In her opinion, it would be wiser for the younger generation to control the family budget and allocate funds more efficiently. Marjorie, you're a smart woman, she said to me, laying out a solitaire game on the kitchen table and glancing at me from time to time over the cards. Face the truth. At your age, your needs are minimal: food, basic medicines, utility bills. Raymond and I still have our whole lives ahead of us. We need to think about the future, make plans, and save money for our old age. A year turned into 2. The atmosphere in the house became increasingly tense and oppressive. Raymond and Tracy no longer hid their irritation when I bought something for myself: a new jacket for walks, a trip to the hairdresser, a book from the store, a jar of good face cream. All of this elicited disapproving looks and snide comments from them, which they did not hesitate to voice aloud. "You've spent money on nonsense again," Raymond would say when he saw my purchases, shaking his head with the look of someone who was deeply disappointed. And here we are, saving on everything to make ends meet, counting every penny. I tried to explain that I was spending my own money, my pension, which I had earned over 35 years of working in a school library. I started working back when librarians were paid peanuts, but I loved my job and never complained. Gradually, my salary increased. I received seniority bonuses, and by the time I retired, my income was quite decent. But these explanations only angered them even more. "Your money?" Tracy sneered, raising her eyebrows and spreading her arms dramatically. We live as one family. We run a common household. How can there be your money and our money? Everything should go into the common pot, and decisions about spending should be made collectively. Gradually, I realized that I had fallen into a trap from which it would not be easy to escape. Raymond and Tracy had settled into my house for good and now considered themselves full-fledged owners. They moved all their belongings from their rented apartment in Houston and took over the master bedroom, which used to be mine and Harold's, while I was moved to the guest room at the end of the hall. "You'll be more comfortable there," Tracy explained, covering my marital bed with her bright pink bedding. "The room is smaller, easier to clean, and the bathroom is nearby. We need more space for our things. Raymond has a lot of suits, and I have cosmetics and professional tools." I said nothing then, even though my heart was bleeding. Harold and I had spent the best years of our lives in that bedroom. He died there in my arms, holding my hand and whispering words of love. Now strangers were sleeping in our bed, people who thought they had the right to control my home and my life. Every night I heard their conversations through the thin walls, the TV they turned on at full volume, without regard for the fact that I might want to sleep. 2 years turned into 3. The situation became absurd. Raymond and Tracy demanded that I report to them for every penny I spent. They took my bank cards away under the pretext that at my age it was easy to fall victim to fraudsters, and now they gave me small amounts of pocket money, like a child being given money for breakfast at school. "It's for your own safety, Mom," Raymond explained, hiding my wallet in a desk drawer and locking it with a key. "Older people are often victims of scammers. Every day on TV, they show how old people are being cheated. It's better if we take care of the finances. We have more experience in the modern world." Today's argument was the last straw. Tracy demanded that I officially transfer the right to manage my pension to them by signing some documents they brought from the bank. When I refused and said I wanted to consult a lawyer first, Raymond exploded and yelled at me like he had never yelled before. His face was contorted with rage, his eyes were bloodshot, and at that moment he seemed like a complete stranger to me, someone I had never seen before. "Don't you trust us?" he yelled, waving his arms and pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. "We've been serving you like servants for 3 years, and you still think of us as strangers, you ungrateful old woman." The words "ungrateful old woman" coming from my own son's mouth hurt more than any slap in the face. I felt something break inside me, as if the last thread connecting me to these people had snapped. Tracy stood nearby and nodded, supporting her husband's every word, and I saw cold triumph in her eyes. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I get up from the table and walk to the window. The evening lights of Dallas twinkle in the twilight. Cars drive by. People return home to their families, where they are loved and awaited. Life goes on as usual, but I feel like a prisoner in my own home, bought with my and Harold's money, where every little thing is steeped in our memories. But I have something they don't know about. Harold was a prudent man, and his will contains clauses that could radically change the balance of power in this house. I remember the day it all began. It was a year and a half ago, on a hot July evening, when the air conditioner was barely coping with the Texas heat. Raymond was sitting in the living room, staring at his phone, his face gradually darkening. Tracy was busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner and humming to herself. I was reading in my favorite chair by the window, glancing at my son from time to time, and noticing how his jaw muscles were tensing. "Son of a bitch," he finally muttered, throwing the phone onto the sofa cushion. "What happened?" I asked, putting down my book. Raymond was silent for a while, rubbing his temples and staring at the ceiling. Then he sighed heavily and told me that he had been permanently dismissed from the company where he had worked as a sales manager for almost 10 years. First, he was sent on unpaid leave for 3 months. Then it was extended for another month, and now he had been told that his position was being eliminated. They say the real estate market is in crisis, he explained, twirling his former boss's business card in his hands. That there are no sales, that the company is forced to optimize costs. But in reality, they just want to replace experienced employees with young ones who can be paid half as much. Tracy came out of the kitchen, drying her hands with a dish towel, and sat down next to her husband. Her face expressed sympathy, but I noticed how quickly she was thinking through the situation, weighing the options. Tracy always had a practical mind and was able to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. "It's okay, honey," she said, patting Raymond on the shoulder. "We'll find something else. You have a lot of experience and good references. Maybe it's for the best. You can try your hand at something new." Raymond nodded, but I could see that his confidence was shaken. Losing a stable job at 44 is a serious blow, especially when the economy is not doing well. He said that his severance pay would cover his expenses for a maximum of 2 months, and then he would have to live on Tracy's salary. "How much do you earn at the salon?" I asked my sister-in-law. "About 1,200 a month," she replied, and I saw her lips tighten. "Sometimes more if there are a lot of customers, but it's usually slow in the summer. People go on vacation and cut back on beauty treatments. $1,200 a month for a family of two is very little, especially considering that they had to rent an apartment in Houston, pay for a car, insurance, and groceries. I understood that it would be really hard for them, and I sincerely sympathize with their situation. "Maybe you should stay with me a little longer," I suggested, "until Raymond finds a new job. Why spend money on rent when there are so many empty rooms here?" Tracy instantly perked up, and Raymond looked at me gratefully. They exchanged glances, and I caught that quick look, which flashed with something like relief. Later, I realized that they had been counting on such an offer from me for a long time. "Mom, are you sure?" Raymond asked, but there was no doubt in his voice. "We don't want to be a burden." "No burden at all," I assured them. "On the contrary, I'll be happy to have more life in the house." For the next few months, Raymond really did look for work. He woke up early, looked through ads on the internet, called acquaintances, and went to interviews. I saw how hard he was trying, how upset he got after each rejection. Tracy supported him, cooked delicious dinners, and helped him write his resume. "The job market is just terrible right now," she complained to me as we sat on the porch after dinner. "Raymond has already been to 15 interviews, and it's the same everywhere. Either the salary is ridiculous, or the requirements are too high, or they just say they'll take someone younger." I nodded, sympathizing with their problems. I remembered how hard it was to find a job when I was young and had no experience. Now, apparently, the problem was that they had too much experience. Gradually, the tone of their conversation began to change. Whereas before they had talked about temporary difficulties that would soon be over, now they increasingly complained about the unfairness of life, about a system that gave honest people no chance. Raymond became more irritable, and Tracy began to express thoughts that perhaps it was time to rethink their priorities. "You know, Marjorie," she said to me once, stirring soup on the stove, "I think there's something wrong with the distribution of resources in our society. For example, you receive a decent pension, live in a large house, and spend at most half of your income. Meanwhile, young families struggle for every dollar. At the time, these words seemed to me to be just reflections on social justice, but gradually they became more specific and insistent. "Mom, how much do you actually get in pension?" Raymond asked me one day at breakfast. I was surprised by such a direct question, but I answered honestly. My pension was $2,300 a month, plus Social Security benefits, a total of about $2,700. By Texas standards, that was quite a decent amount of money for a single elderly woman. "Not bad," Tracy remarked, and there was a note in her voice that I couldn't quite place. How much of that do you spend? I thought about it. Indeed, my expenses were modest. Utilities, groceries, medicine, sometimes clothes or books. It came to about $1,000 a month, and I saved or spent the rest on gifts, charity, and small pleasures. See? Tracy said to Raymond as if I hadn't heard. The three of us live on my salary of $1,200. Something's not right here. From that moment on, the topic of my income and expenses came up regularly in conversation, at first cautiously, with hints, then more and more openly. Tracy began to draw my attention to how much money I was wasting on all sorts of little things. Marjorie, why do you need such expensive shampoo? She asked, looking at my purchase from the drugstore. There's exactly the same one, but 3 times cheaper. Or these vitamins. Are you sure you need them? Maybe it's just a marketing ploy? Raymond supported his wife, adding that older people often fall victim to advertising, buying heavily promoted products, and overpaying for the brand. In their opinion, it would be wiser to buy cheaper products and use the money saved for the family's general needs. Mom, you understand, Raymond said to me, sitting in my favorite chair and leafing through a magazine, that we are now one family. It would be logical if we had a shared budget. You spend money on yourself, and we save on everything so as not to be a burden. This logic seemed flawless to them. Tracy was particularly vocal about how in traditional families, the younger generation takes care of the older generation, but the older generation helps the younger generation financially. Look at Chinese or Indian families, she argued as she hung laundry in the yard. Several generations live together and help each other. Grandparents help with their grandchildren, and young parents provide for the whole family. Everything works like clockwork. Only we didn't have grandchildren, and only one of the three of us worked. But Tracy wasn't bothered by these details. Gradually, the requests became more specific. First, they asked me to pay the utility bills. They said that since we all lived in the same house, it was fair that the expenses be distributed proportionally to our incomes. Then they suggested that I buy groceries for the whole family. After all, we all ate at the same table. Marjorie, you go to the store every other day, Tracy said as she made a shopping list. I work late and just don't have time to shop. How about you buy groceries for everyone, and we'll cook? We'll divide up the responsibilities. It sounded reasonable, so I agreed. But soon I noticed that the shopping list was filling up with increasingly expensive items, delicacies, expensive meat, imported cheeses that I would never have bought myself. When I tried to point this out, Tracy explained that Raymond was on a diet and needed special food to stay healthy. He has stomach problems from stress, she said seriously. The doctor advised him to eat only high-quality foods without preservatives or chemicals. You don't want your son to get sick, do you? Of course I didn't. So I bought what they asked for, even when the grocery bills doubled. I thought it was a temporary measure until Raymond found a job. But months went by, and there was still no job. Raymond began to spend less time looking for jobs and more time playing computer games and watching TV. His explanations became increasingly vague. It's not hiring season right now, he would say, without looking up from the screen. All companies are waiting for the new year to review their budgets. It's pointless to waste time on interviews with no prospects. Tracy supported him, adding that it was better to wait for a really good offer than to grab the first low-paying job that came along. In her opinion, Raymond deserved a decent position that matched his experience and qualifications. Why should he go work as a salesperson in a store for $800 a month? It's humiliating for someone of his caliber, she said indignantly. It's better to wait until something worthwhile comes along. In the meantime, their appetites grew. They began to hint that I should help them not only with their current expenses, but also with the debts they had accumulated during their unemployment. They had credit card debt, overdue car payments, and traffic violation fines. Mom, can you lend us 5,000? Raymond asked me one evening while we were watching TV. We need to pay off our debts, or the interest will keep growing every day. As soon as I find a job, I'll pay you back right away. $5,000 is almost 2 months of my pension. It's a lot of money, but I understood that it was really better to pay off the debts quickly. I gave them the money, getting Raymond to promise to pay it back within 6 months. Of course, no one paid anything back. What's more, a month later they asked for another $3,000 to repair the car, without which Tracy couldn't get to work. Then another $2,000 for Raymond's dental treatment. Then more and more. By the end of their first year living with me, I realized that I had become the sole source of income for this family. Tracy complained more and more often of fatigue and back pain, took sick leave, and sometimes simply did not go to work, citing migraines or colds. "This job is killing me," she said, lying on the couch with a cold compress on her forehead. 8 hours on my feet, toxic chemicals, moody customers. I'm not young enough to put up with this kind of stress anymore. In the end, she quit, saying she would look for something more suitable. Now there were 3 unemployed people living in the house, but only one of them was earning an income. The turning point came in September, when the air in Dallas finally cooled down and the leaves on the maple tree in the yard began to turn yellow. I remember that day clearly because in the morning I received a letter from the bank notifying me that I had less than $10,000 left in my account. In a year and a half of living together, my savings, which I had accumulated over decades, had virtually evaporated. I sat in the kitchen, holding the bank statement in my hands, trying to understand how this had happened. 40 years of work, saving on everything, giving up many desires. And this was the result. Of course, I knew I was spending more than usual, but I didn't think it had gotten this bad. Raymond and Tracy slept until noon, as usual, while I sat alone with these numbers that showed the disaster of my financial situation. When they finally showed up in the kitchen, I decided to have a serious talk with them. I showed them the statement and explained that I could no longer support the whole family on one pension. I suggested drawing up a budget, finding ways to save money, and discussing their plans for employment. "Mom, are you out of your mind?" Raymond protested, without even looking at the papers. "What savings? We already live modestly and don't allow ourselves any luxuries." I reminded him of the expensive groceries that appeared in our shopping cart, the restaurants they went to a couple of times a week, and the new clothes Tracy bought, supposedly for work. Raymond dismissed my words, and Tracy rolled her eyes. "Marjorie, you're talking nonsense," she said, pouring herself coffee and pointedly not offering me any. "A couple of dinners a month and a few blouses are not luxuries, but the bare minimum necessary to maintain social status. Do you want us to sit at home like hermits?" I tried to explain that it wasn't about being reclusive, but about spending wisely on a limited budget. I suggested they consider looking for at least temporary work, anything, even with a small salary. "Temporary work?" Raymond repeated, looking at me as if I had suggested he become a prostitute. "Mom, do you understand that I'm a high-level professional? I can't go work at McDonald's or unload trucks. It would ruin my reputation in the industry." Tracy nodded vigorously in support of her husband. "Exactly. And I can't work in cheap salons where the clients are mostly housewives who come in for a haircut every 6 months. I need a place where I can develop professionally, where there are prospects for career growth." Their logic amazed me. They considered themselves too good for affordable work, but at the same time saw nothing wrong with living off my pension. I said this directly, and then the atmosphere in the kitchen became tense. "Listen to me carefully," Tracy began, sitting down opposite me and looking me straight in the eye. "You've been living in this house alone for 3 years. During that time, You've never been seriously ill because we take care of you. You don't feel lonely because you have your family around you. Your house isn't empty, it's not falling into disrepair. She spoke calmly, but there was a threatening tone in her voice. Now imagine what will happen if we leave. You'll be completely alone at 72. Who will buy your groceries when you get sick? Who will call an ambulance if you feel unwell? Who will just talk to you in the evenings? Raymond picked up on this theme. Mom, you don't understand what a dangerous age you're at. Statistics show that single elderly people live shorter lives than those who are surrounded by family care. Do you want to risk your health and your life for some money? This was a new tactic. They were trying to present their presence as a necessity for me, not the other way around. Tracy elaborated on this idea, painting a bleak picture of my lonely future. Do you know how many elderly people die alone at home? She continued. They are found a few days later when the neighbors smell something. It's terrible, but all this can be avoided if the family lives together. I argued that I had managed perfectly well on my own before they arrived, that I had friends, neighbors, and doctors who looked after me. But Tracy shook her head with the air of someone explaining the obvious to a stubborn child. Marjorie, you've changed in the last 3 years. You've become more dependent on our help. It's a natural process. People your age gradually lose their independence. We don't notice it because we live nearby, but if we leave, you'll immediately feel the difference. Then the conversation took a completely unexpected turn. Tracy suddenly started talking about the need to review the principles of family budget allocation. In her opinion, the existing system was inefficient and unfair. Listen, let's be honest with each other, she said, standing up and starting to pace around the kitchen. You receive a pension, but you spend it unwisely. You buy expensive medicines that you may not even need. You take taxis when you could take the bus. You order food delivery when you could cook for yourself. Raymond nodded, agreeing with his wife's every word. We are young, energetic, and know how to plan our expenses, Tracy continued. We have experience managing a family budget. We know where we can save and where it's worth spending more for long-term benefits. I asked what they were getting at, and then Tracy laid out her plan. It's very simple. Your pension should go into a joint family account, which we will manage. We'll buy everything we need for the house, plan major purchases, and control utility bills. And we'll give you pocket money for your personal needs, as much as you really need. I was breathless with shock at such audacity. They were offering me to become a dependent in my own home, receiving money from them for small expenses, like a teenager from their parents. That's out of the question, I said as calmly as possible. I'll manage my own money, as I've done all my life. All your life, you've lived with a husband who helped you make financial decisions, Tracy replied sharply. Now you're alone, and frankly, you're not very good at budgeting. Look at your bank statement. Is that the result of a sensible approach to spending? Raymond supported his wife. Mom, we don't want to control you or restrict your freedom. We're just suggesting a more effective system for managing the family finances. You'll get everything you need, but without unnecessary expenses. I refused outright, and then their tone changed. Tracy sat back down at the table, folded her arms, and looked at me with cold determination. All right, Marjorie, then let's talk frankly about your future. You live in a big house that is becoming too much for you to handle. Soon you'll need constant medical attention, special care. Have you thought about what you'll do when you can't climb the stairs or cook for yourself? I have no trouble getting around, I objected. And I'm an excellent cook. For now, Raymond remarked grimly. But what will happen in a year or two? You'll be all alone, without support or help. But there are special facilities where elderly people receive professional care, socialize with their peers, and participate in various programs. I realized that they were hinting at a nursing home, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Tracy confirmed my suspicions. You know, I've looked into this. There are very good facilities for elderly people that provide excellent conditions, medical supervision, leisure programs, balanced meals, and it's much cheaper than maintaining a large house. Are you suggesting I move into a nursing home? I clarified. I'm suggesting you consider reasonable alternatives, Tracy replied. The house can be sold and the money can be invested in a decent facility where you can spend your remaining years in comfort and safety. And we can finally build our own lives without spending all our energy caring for an elderly relative. Raymond elaborated on this topic. Mom, you understand that we can't sit around all our lives without work, taking care of you. We also have the right to personal happiness, to our own families. Maybe we'll still have time to have children, but for that, we need stability, our own home. No one is forcing you to take care of me, I said. I can manage perfectly well on my own. That's not true, Tracy objected. Over the past 3 years, you've gotten used to our help. We do the shopping, cooking, cleaning, and solve everyday problems. You have no idea how many little things we do every day. They began to list their achievements: taking out the trash, washing dishes, doing laundry, keeping the house tidy. At the same time, they kept quiet about the fact that I still did most of the housework myself, and they only occasionally helped with the simplest things. And anyway, Tracy added, at your age, it's dangerous to live in a two-story house. What if you fall down the stairs or forget to turn off the stove? The statistics on accidents involving elderly people are simply terrifying. The conversation lasted over an hour. They took turns scaring me with loneliness, convincing me of their own necessity, and painting a bleak picture of independent living. Their main point was that I should be grateful to them for their care and give them all my income in return. Think of it as an investment in your own safety, Tracy summed up. You're investing money in a family that provides you with comfort and support. Isn't that a fair exchange? In the end, they gave me an ultimatum. Either I agreed to their terms, or they would have to reconsider the possibility of continuing to live together. At the same time, they hinted that their departure would be a disaster for me. We don't want to abandon you, Mom, Raymond said with the look of a martyr, but we can't live in constant financial stress anymore. We have to make adult decisions. I asked for time to think, and they generously gave me until the end of the week. Tracy even patted me on the shoulder as she left. Of course, dear. This is a serious decision. It can't be made in haste, but I'm sure you'll make the right choice. The week of reflection came to an end on Saturday morning as I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cooling tea, looking out the window at the fallen leaves in the yard. During those 7 days, I had hardly slept, agonizingly weighing all the options. On the one hand, there was the fear of loneliness and the painful doubts about my own abilities that they had so skillfully cultivated in me. On the other hand, there was the realization that if I agreed to their terms now, I would lose what little independence I had left forever. I thought about Harold, about what he would do in such a situation. My husband never let anyone push him around, not even relatives. He was a gentle and kind man, but when it came to principles, he was as firm as iron. I remembered how he once refused to lend his brother a large sum of money, explaining that loans between relatives destroy family relationships. Raymond and Tracy spent the week in tense anticipation, sometimes talking to me in an encouraging tone, sometimes giving me meaningful looks. They diligently demonstrated their concern. Tracy baked my favorite apple pie. Raymond offered to drive me to the doctor, even though I could easily get there myself by bus. These gestures seemed artificial, as if actors had rehearsed their roles before an important performance. On Friday evening, Tracy cautiously asked if I was ready to discuss their proposal. I replied that I would make a final decision on Saturday morning. Raymond nodded with the look of an understanding son, but there was a flicker of impatience in his eyes. Of course, Mom. The main thing is that you feel comfortable with our decision, he said, but his tone of voice revealed that comfort was the least of his concerns. Saturday began deceptively calm. I got up early, made breakfast, and sat down to think about how exactly to tell them my decision. By 9 o'clock, they had come downstairs, and it was clear from their faces that their patience was running out. Tracy was nervously fixing her hair, and Raymond was tapping his fingers on the table, a sure sign that he was nervous. "Well, Mom?" he asked, without even saying hello. "Have you decided?" I looked at them both, these people who had lived in my house for 3 years, eaten my food, spent my money, and now demanded complete control over my life. I thought about how Raymond had changed over the years, from an unemployed but grateful son to a demanding freeloader who took my help for granted. "Yes, I've made up my mind," I replied calmly. "I can't agree to your terms." There was a moment of silence. Tracy slowly put her coffee cup on the table, and Raymond frowned as if he had heard something unbelievable. "What do you mean, you can't?" Tracy asked, a dangerous note in her voice. "It means I'm not going to give you control over my finances," I explained. "It's my money, I earned it, and I'll decide how to spend it." Raymond stood up abruptly from the table, knocking over the sugar bowl. Sugar scattered across the tabletop in fine white crystals, but no one paid any attention to it. "Mom, have you completely lost your mind?" he exploded. "We've been taking care of you for 3 years, sacrificing our lives, and you don't even show us basic gratitude." "Sacrificing your lives?" I asked, feeling long suppressed anger boiling up inside me. "Raymond, you haven't worked in 3 years. You live off me, and you call that a sacrifice? Who does your shopping? Who takes you to the hospital?" Tracy joined the argument. "Do you think this happens by itself? We have our own lives, our own plans." "What plans?" I couldn't hold back. "Lying on the couch and playing computer games? Are those your grand plans for life, Raymond?" My son flushed with anger and began pacing around the kitchen, waving his arms. "You don't understand the current job market. You don't know how hard it is to find a decent job. And instead of supporting us, you criticize us. Support is one thing, but supporting healthy adults is quite another," I replied. "You could find any job if you really wanted to." Tracy jumped up from her seat, her face contorted with rage. "Any job? Do you want me to go mop floors in offices or work at a kiosk? Do you want Raymond to load boxes in a warehouse? We have education, experience, qualifications, and a complete unwillingness to work," I added. Then Raymond completely lost his temper. He came up close to me, looming over the chair, and his voice became threatening. "Listen to me carefully, Mom. We offered you a civilized solution to the problem. You refuse it. That's your right. But then we'll just take what we're entitled to by law." "What are you entitled to by law?" I asked in surprise. "You're my mother, and I'm your only heir," Raymond said, a nasty gleam in his eyes. "This house, all your savings, sooner or later it will all be mine. So why wait? Let's settle this now while you're still of sound mind." Tracy supported her husband. "Marjorie, you understand that at your age, any stress can lead to memory problems, to dementia. Doctors say that 70 is a critical age for such diseases. It's better to transfer control of your property now while you can still make informed decisions." I realized that they didn't just want to control my pension. They wanted my whole house, everything I had, and they were willing to declare me incompetent to get it. "You know what, Mom?" Raymond continued, pacing around the kitchen and clearly getting worked up. "Enough of these games. We're adults, let's be honest. Give me the bank cards, the house documents, all the financial papers. I'm taking control of the family budget." "I'm not giving you anything," I replied firmly. Then Tracy leaned across the table toward me, her face taking on a cruel expression. "All right, Marjorie, then let me remind you of reality. You're an old, lonely woman with no one but us. Your friends from the library are either dead or in nursing homes. Your neighbors don't particularly like you. I've heard them complain about your music in the evenings. You don't have the money for a private nurse or a housekeeper." She spoke slowly, savoring every word. "Now imagine that we leave. You'll be all alone. Who will buy your groceries when the snow starts falling? Who will help you if you fall and break your hip? Who will even notice that something has happened to you?" Raymond picked up on the threat. "Mom, you're putting us in an impossible position. We can't live in uncertainty anymore, wasting the best years of our lives waiting for your whims. Either you meet us halfway or we'll have to consider other options." "What other options?" I asked. Tracy and Raymond exchanged glances, and I saw something cold and calculating in their eyes. "There are procedures," Tracy said cautiously. "Legal ways to protect the interests of elderly people who cannot adequately assess their needs. Guardianship, for example." I felt the blood drain from my veins. "They threatened to go to court to have me declared incompetent and appoint Raymond as my guardian." "You wouldn't dare," I whispered. "We would dare," Raymond replied maliciously. "We have every reason to. Your reckless spending, your refusal to accept help from your family, your strange behavior lately. Any psychiatrist will confirm that you need guardianship." Then I got up from the table and slowly walked over to the dresser in the corner of the kitchen. My hands were shaking, but I tried to remain calm. I opened the top drawer where I kept important documents and took out the folder with Harold's will. "What's that?" Tracy asked warily. I returned to the table, placed the folder in front of me, and looked at them both. They waited, tense and ready for another attack, but there was a flicker of concern in their eyes. "This is your father's will," I said, opening the folder. "I think you should take a look at it." Raymond frowned, and Tracy leaned forward, trying to see the documents. "Why do we need some old will?" Raymond muttered. "Dad died 3 years ago. All his property has long been settled." "Not quite everything," I replied and took several pages of typewritten text out of the folder. My hands were no longer shaking. On the contrary, I felt a strange calmness that comes when a long-hidden truth finally comes out. "According to Harold's will, the house goes to you, Raymond, but only on one condition." I found the relevant paragraph and read it aloud slowly and clearly. "The house on Maple Street shall pass to my son Raymond on condition that he provides decent care and maintenance for my wife Marjorie for the rest of her life. In the event that my son mistreats his mother, forces her to do anything against her will, or causes her moral harm, the house shall automatically become the property of the Texas Senior Citizens Protection Charity." A dead silence fell. Tracy slowly sank into a chair, and Raymond's face turned pale. "This can't be," he whispered. "It can be," I replied, showing them the notary's signature and official seals. "Your father was a prudent man. He knew that money could change people, and he wanted to protect me from possible abuse." Tracy grabbed the document and began to study it feverishly. Raymond read over her shoulder, and I saw their expressions change from disbelief to horror. "Mom, you couldn't," Raymond began, but his voice broke, and I suddenly felt that everything in my life had fallen into place. Tracy continued to study the document, turning the pages back and forth as if hoping to find some loophole or discover that it was a forgery. Her fingers trembled as she ran them over the lines, and I could see the gravity of the situation gradually sinking in. Raymond stood nearby, leaning his hand on the back of her chair, his face taking on the grayish pallor of someone who has received an unexpected and painful blow. This is impossible," Tracy muttered, looking up from the papers. Harold couldn't have written this. He loved Raymond, trusted him. Why would he make a will like this? I sat back down in my chair, feeling a strange sense of relief. For 3 years, I had carried this secret with me, knowing the document existed but hoping it would never be needed. Harold had warned me about its contents while he was still alive, explaining his motives. Dad made this will 6 months before he died, I explained calmly. When the doctors diagnosed him and it became clear that he didn't have much time left, he was worried about what would happen to me after he was gone. Raymond sat up straight, and his eyes took on the expression of a man trying to find a way out of a hopeless situation. But that's ridiculous, he exclaimed, beginning to pace nervously around the kitchen. Father couldn't have seriously thought that I would treat my own mother badly. That's paranoia. Harold was a very wise man, I replied. He understood that money and inheritance can change people's attitudes. And he was right, as you can see. Tracy suddenly threw the documents on the table with such force that several sheets fell to the floor. Her face contorted with anger, and her voice became shrill. This is a setup. You deliberately hid this information from us for 3 years. You lured us here, made us spend time and energy caring for you, knowing full well that you had this trump card up your sleeve. I calmly bent down and picked up the fallen sheets. No one lured you here, I said, carefully folding the papers back into the folder. You suggested moving here yourselves. You talked about mutual help and support, and I just hoped that the will would never be needed. Raymond stopped in front of my chair and looked at me with despair in his eyes. Mom, let's forget about it, okay? He began in a pleading tone. Let's just go back to a normal family relationship. We're family. Why do we need these legal formalities? Family members don't threaten each other with guardianship, I replied, and they don't demand all the money. Tracy jumped up from her chair, her face red with rage. You played with us like a cat with mice, she shouted. We lived in this house for 3 years, thinking we were helping you, and you knew you could kick us out at any moment. I didn't kick anyone out, I objected. On the contrary, I put up with your antics, hoping you would come to your senses and start behaving like human beings. Raymond clutched his head in his hands, and I saw that he was trying to comprehend the new reality. All his plans, all his calculations for my inheritance were crumbling before his eyes. But there must be some way to contest this will, he exclaimed. You can prove that Dad wasn't in his right mind when he made it, or that you pressured him. Harold made his will in the presence of 2 independent witnesses and a notary, I explained. He underwent a medical examination beforehand, confirming his full legal capacity. The lawyer explained all the consequences of each clause to him in detail. It is impossible to contest this document. Tracy began to pace around the kitchen, waving her arms and muttering something under her breath. Then she stopped and stared at me with hatred. So you've been fooling us all this time, pretending to be a helpless old woman who needs care while keeping us on a short leash. I wasn't fooling anyone, I replied calmly. I was truly grateful for the help in the first few months after Harold's death, but gradually your help turned into extortion. Raymond came up to me and knelt down next to the chair, as if begging for mercy. Mom, please, he began, his voice breaking. Let's just forget what happened today. I understand that we behaved badly and demanded too much, but we can fix everything. I'll find a job. Tracy will too. We'll help you around the house, but without any demands or complaints. I looked at my only son, who was once a sweet boy who helped me carry groceries from the store, and felt a deep sadness. Years of unemployment and idleness had turned him into a man who was willing to humiliate himself for money. Raymond, you've already shown your true colors, I said. This morning you threatened me, demanded control of my finances, and promised to seek custody. How can I trust you after that? But it was just an emotional outburst. He justified himself. We're tired of the uncertainty, of the constant money problems. People say stupid things when they're stressed. Tracy suddenly sat down on the floor in the middle of the kitchen and burst into tears. Her crying was theatrical, with heart-wrenching sobs and wails. "My God, what will become of us now?" she wailed. "We spent the best years of our lives caring for an ungrateful old woman, and now we're left with nothing. Where will we find money for housing? Who will hire us at our age?" I watched this scene with disgust. Tracy always knew how to cry when she wanted something, but today her performance seemed particularly unconvincing. "Get up off the floor," I said coldly. "No one forced you to spend years doing nothing. You had plenty of opportunities to find a job and get on your feet." Raymond got up from his knees and helped his wife up from the floor, sitting her down on a chair. Tracy continued to sob, but more quietly, apparently realizing that her tears were not having the desired effect. "Mom, okay," Raymond said, trying to pull himself together. "Let's say we really did behave badly. But surely there's some way to resolve this situation peacefully. We're family after all." "Family," I repeated bitterly. "Raymond, you called me an ungrateful old woman. Your wife demanded that I give you my entire pension and live on handouts. You threatened to have me declared incompetent in court. Is that your idea of family relations?" Tracy lifted her tear-stained face and tried to look remorseful. "Marjorie, we were just very worried about our financial problems," she said in a trembling voice. "When a person is desperate, they can say things they don't mean. We never really intended to hurt you." "You didn't?" I asked. "Then what did your conversations about a nursing home mean? About me being too old to live on my own? About the need for guardianship?" Raymond tried to find an excuse. "We were just worried about your safety. At your age, it's really dangerous to live alone in such a big house. We wanted what was best for you." "What's best for whom? Me or you?" I clarified. They exchanged glances, and I saw despair in their eyes. It gradually dawned on them that all their plans had fallen through, that there was no longer any possibility of living off me and building illusions about my inheritance. "Okay," Raymond finally said, a note of anger creeping into his voice. "Let's say you're right. We behaved badly. We demanded too much. But now what? Do you want us to leave here and leave you all alone?" "That's exactly what I want," I replied firmly. Tracy threw her head back, and the tears on her face dried instantly. "You can't just kick us out," she exclaimed. "We're registered in this house. We have rights." "What rights?" I asked. "You live here as guests, without any official documents, and these guests have abused my hospitality." Raymond began to think quickly, trying to find some kind of leverage. "But we can change our behavior," he insisted. "Give us another chance, Mom. We'll find jobs, start paying for our stay, and help you around the house without making any demands." "It's too late," I replied. "The trust is gone. This morning you showed what you're capable of when it comes to money. I no longer feel safe around you." Tracy jumped up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. "Safety?" she screamed. "We've been slaving away for you for 3 years, cooking, cleaning, carrying groceries, and you're talking about safety? You cooked with my money, cleaned my house, bought groceries on my dime," I reminded them, "and you constantly complained that you were doing too much for an ungrateful old woman." Raymond tried a different tactic. He appealed to my maternal instincts. "Mom, I'm your only son," he said softly. "You have no one else in this world. Are you really willing to destroy your last family ties for money?" "It's not about money, it's about principles," I replied. "And it wasn't me who destroyed the family ties. It was you when you started treating me as a source of income rather than as a mother. Tracy tried to play the pity card again. But where will we go? She sobbed. We don't have money for a deposit on an apartment. We don't have jobs. We don't have savings. We'll end up on the street. That's not my problem, I replied harshly. 3 years ago, you had an apartment in Houston, some savings, and Tracy had a job. You chose the path of dependency yourself. Raymond realized that soft tactics weren't working and decided to return to threats. Fine, Mom, he said coldly, but keep one thing in mind. I'm still your only heir. Sooner or later, all your property will go to me. This will only be enough to delay the inevitable. I looked at him in surprise. Even now, when his plans had failed, he continued to think about the inheritance. Raymond, you're forgetting one detail, I said calmly. According to the will, if you treat me badly, the house goes to a charity, and your behavior this morning definitely falls under the definition of bad treatment. He turned pale, realizing the meaning of my words. Are you going to deprive me of my inheritance? He whispered. I'm going to defend myself by any means necessary, I replied. And if that means activating the clause about transferring the house to a charity, then I'm prepared to take that step. Tracy made an incoherent sound, and Raymond grabbed the table with his hands to keep from falling. Mom, you can't do this, he whispered. This house is all we have. It's our only hope for the future. You have your hands, your feet, your education, I reminded her. That's enough to build your own life without relying on someone else's inheritance. Then Tracy completely lost her composure. She started screaming, accusing me of cruelty, selfishness, and ingratitude. She said I was ruining the young family's life, depriving them of their chance at happiness, acting like an evil witch from a fairy tale. Raymond tried to calm her down at first, but then joined in with the barrage of accusations. They both yelled at me, interrupting each other, pouring out all their pent-up anger and disappointment. I listened to this chorus and felt a strange calmness. Finally, the masks came off, and I saw their true faces, the faces of people who considered me an obstacle to an easy life. When the shouting subsided, I got up from my chair and solemnly announced, "You have a month to find another place to live and move out of here. That's enough time to find a job and rent an apartment." Tracy burst into tears again, and Raymond looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time in his life. "A month?" he asked. "Mom, that's impossible. Where are we going to find jobs and a place to live in a month?" "The same place you would have found if you hadn't been living off me for 3 years," I replied and headed for the kitchen door. At the threshold, I turned around and added, "And don't try to persuade or blackmail me. My decision is final." The next few days passed in the tense atmosphere that prevails in a house before an inevitable parting. Raymond and Tracy didn't immediately believe that I was serious. Apparently, they hoped that this was just another outburst that would pass, like all our previous quarrels had passed. But when I started taking their personal belongings out of the master bedroom and putting them in the guest room, they realized that this time it was for real. For the first 2 days, they pointedly ignored me, whispering to each other and giving me meaningful looks. Tracy sighed so loudly that it could be heard throughout the house, and Raymond deliberately spoke loudly on the phone, discussing our family situation with someone and portraying himself as a victim of his mother's cruelty. "Yes, can you imagine?" he said into the phone, standing in the hallway so that I would definitely hear him. 3 years of care, sacrifice, complete devotion, and this is the result. She's kicking her own son out onto the street because of some financial disagreement, but by the third day, when it became clear that I was not going to change my mind, they took action. Attempts at persuasion began, taking many different forms, from tearful pleas to practical proposals for resolving the situation. On Monday morning, Raymond knocked on my door and entered with the look of a man ready for a serious conversation. He was neatly dressed, shaved, and combed. Apparently, he had decided to make an impression with his solidity and responsibility. "Mom, can we talk?" he asked in the respectful tone he used to speak to me when he was a child and had done something wrong and wanted to avoid punishment. I was sitting in a chair by the window with a book in my hands and didn't look up from the page. "Go ahead," I said curtly. Raymond approached uncertainly and sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands on his knees, trying to look humble. "I thought about our conversation on Saturday all night," he began cautiously, "and I realized that Tracy and I really went too far. We demanded the impossible from you and didn't take your needs and desires into account." I turned the page, showing that I was listening but not particularly impressed by his confession. "Mom, I'm ready to change everything," Raymond continued, a pleading note in his voice. "I'll start actively looking for a job today. I won't be picky. I'll take any job, just to start earning money. Tracy will find a job too. She's already called several salons." I finally looked up from my book and looked at my son. His eyes showed despair mixed with hope. He really believed he could fix the situation with pretty promises. "And how long will this enthusiasm last?" I asked calmly. "A week, a month, until your first paycheck?" "Mom, I'm serious," Raymond exclaimed. "I understand that I disappointed you, that I behaved irresponsibly, but people can change, learn from their mistakes." "Raymond, you already promised to find a job 3 years ago when you first moved here," I reminded him. "Then you promised several more times when I started to get upset about your spending. Why should I believe you now?" He hesitated, trying to find convincing arguments. "Because now I understand the seriousness of the situation," he finally said. "I used to think we had time, that we could afford not to rush into finding a job. But now I realize that I've jeopardized our relationship and your trust in me." I closed the book and placed it on my lap, studying my son's face intently. Over the years of living together, I had learned to distinguish his moods, to understand when he was being sincere and when he was just trying to get his way. "What about Tracy?" I asked. "Is she also remorseful for her behavior?" Raymond nodded hastily. "Of course. She is very upset that she brought the situation to a conflict. Tracy understands that she was too harsh in her demands and did not take your feelings into account." As if on cue, Tracy herself entered the room. She looked embarrassed and guilty, her hair neatly styled, her makeup modest, dressed in a simple dark dress that gave her an almost monastic appearance. "Marjorie," she said in a quiet, contrite voice, "may I say a few words too?" I nodded, curious to see what role she had chosen for herself in this drama. Tracy came closer and knelt down next to my chair, a gesture meant to emphasize the depth of her remorse. "I want to apologize for my behavior lately," she began in a trembling voice. "I realize I've been rude, ungrateful, and demanding. Financial difficulties have made me angry and cruel, but that's no excuse." She spoke beautifully, eloquently, like someone who had rehearsed this speech in front of a mirror for a long time. But in her eyes, I saw cold calculation, not sincere remorse. "Tracy, you demanded that I give you my entire pension and live on the money you would allocate to me," I reminded her. "Was that called caring for my well-being?" Tracy lowered her eyes and shook her head. "No, it was selfishness on my part. I only thought about our problems, our needs. I didn't consider that you also have the right to dispose of your money. What about the threats about the nursing home? The talk about how dangerous it was for me to live alone? That was that was an attempt to force you into a decision that was beneficial to us," Tracy admitted, and for the first time there was a note of sincerity in her voice. "I know it was mean and wrong." Raymond watched his wife approvingly. Apparently, they had agreed on tactics and lines in advance. Mom, we're ready for any conditions, he interjected. Do you want us to pay for living here as tenants? We'll sign a lease and pay every month. With what money? I asked. You don't have jobs. You have no income. We'll find jobs in the next few days, Tracy promised. I've already arranged interviews at 2 salons, and Raymond has applied to several companies. I looked at them and felt a strange mixture of pity and disgust. Pity because they had really driven themselves into a corner with their laziness and irresponsibility. Disgust because even now, at this critical moment, they couldn't be honest with me or with themselves. What if you don't find a job? I asked. Or what if you find one but quit after a month, like you've done before? What then? Raymond and Tracy exchanged glances, and I caught that quick look of uncertainty. Mom, we give you our word that we'll never let this happen again, Raymond said solemnly. If we break the agreement even once, we'll move out immediately, without arguments or scandals. Honest? I asked ironically. Raymond, you gave me your word when you borrowed money and promised to pay it back. Where is that money? He blushed and hesitated. That's that's different, Mom. Back then, we really had no way to pay back our debts. Now, we're talking about a radical change in lifestyle. Tracy got up from her knees and sat on the edge of the bed next to her husband. Her contrite posture gave way to a more businesslike one. Marjorie, let's be practical, she said. It's going to be really hard for you to live alone in such a big house. Who will help with the cleaning, shopping, and minor repairs? You're not going to hire a housekeeper or a caregiver, are you? Why not? I asked in surprise. If I need help, I'll hire people and pay them for their work. At least it will be an honest business relationship, not family extortion. My words had the effect of a bombshell. Raymond jumped out of bed, and Tracy's face contorted with anger. Family extortion? Raymond asked in an offended tone. Mom, we are your family. We love you and care for you not for money, but from the bottom of our hearts. Out of the goodness of your hearts? I sneered. Then why did you demand control over my pension? Why did you threaten me with guardianship? Loving relatives don't behave like that. Tracy tried to pull herself together and return to a softer approach. We made mistakes, that's true, she said in a conciliatory tone. But mistakes can be corrected. Give us a chance to prove that we've changed. You've already had 3 years to prove your worth, I replied. Instead, you've turned into professional dependence. Raymond sat down again and took my hand, a gesture that had always helped him get forgiveness as a child. Mom, I understand you're hurt, he said softly. We really did abuse your trust and generosity. But you're a mother. Isn't a mother's heart capable of forgiving a repentant son? I gently withdrew my hand from his grasp. A mother's heart is capable of many things, Raymond, but it is not bottomless. In 3 years, you have exhausted my patience and trust. Tracy suddenly spoke in a different tone, more frank and desperate. Marjorie, okay, let's say we're bad people. Let's say we took advantage of your kindness. But what will happen to us if you kick us out? We really have no money, no place to live, no savings. We could end up on the street. These are the consequences of your own decisions, I replied harshly. 3 years ago, you had the opportunity to find work and housing, but you preferred an easy life at my expense. But we didn't know it would turn out this way, Tracy exclaimed. We thought we were helping you, that you needed us here. You were thinking about the inheritance, I corrected her, and about how to make yourselves more comfortable in my house. You weren't interested in my needs or feelings. Raymond tried his last resort, emotional blackmail. Mom, think about what you're doing, he said sadly. You're driving away your only son, severing your last family ties. When you get sick, when you need help, who will come? Hired caregivers can't replace relatives. I looked at him closely and saw a man who was willing to manipulate anyone to achieve his goals. Over the years of living with Tracy, he had changed for the worse. He had become more cunning, more calculating, and had learned to press on weak spots. Raymond, you're forgetting one important detail, I said calmly. Hired caregivers get paid for their work and don't claim my property. But you wanted both. 3 years of living with these people taught me a lot. I realized that kindness without firmness is a weakness that will inevitably be exploited. I realized that some people mistake compliance for stupidity and generosity for obligation. I realized that sometimes cruelty is more merciful than forgiveness because it forces people to grow up and take responsibility for their lives. Harold often told me that I was too soft, that I let people walk all over me. At the time, it seemed like an exaggeration to me. I believed in human gratitude, in the power of family ties, in the possibility of changing people with love and care. Now I understood that my husband was right. My decision is final, I said, getting up from my chair. You have 3.5 weeks to find another place to live. Tracy jumped up after me, her face contorted with anger again. You'll regret this, she shouted. You'll be all alone in this huge house, and there will be no one to bring you a glass of water when you feel sick. Perhaps, I agreed, but at least I won't have to worry about someone trying to declare me incompetent or take away my last savings. Raymond tried to stop his wife, but she was already beyond control. You think we won't find a way to get what we're entitled to? Do you think your precious will protect you from everything? We'll see who outlives whom. Her words sounded almost like a threat, and I felt a chill down my spine, but I didn't show it. If you mean that you're going to wait for me to die, you're wasting your time, I said calmly. I'm in excellent health and plan to live for many more years. Raymond finally took his wife by the hand and dragged her to the exit. Forgive her, Mom, he said. Tracy is just upset. We'll think it over and won't bother you anymore. When they left, I sat back down in my chair and picked up my book. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from relief. I had finally said everything I thought, and I felt free for the first time in 3 years. The last 3 weeks before Raymond and Tracy left were strange, tense, but at the same time liberating. It was as if the house was preparing to exhale deeply after a long period of holding its breath. I noticed that even the sounds had changed. The creaking of the floorboards had become softer, the ticking of the clock in the living room louder, and the birds outside the window sang more cheerfully, as if they sensed the approaching changes. Raymond and Tracy no longer tried to persuade me. After that unsuccessful conversation in my room, they withdrew into themselves and communicated with me only when necessary, with monosyllabic phrases, cold nods, and forced smiles. All their enthusiasm for finding a job evaporated as quickly as it had arisen. Now they spent their time talking on the phone with friends, complaining about the unfairness of life, and making plans for revenge. I couldn't help overhearing their conversations when I walked past their room or the kitchen. Tracy was particularly vocal about the situation with her friends, portraying herself as the victim of a cruel mother-in-law and an ungrateful fate. Can you imagine? She would say into the phone, sitting on the porch and thinking I couldn't hear her. We took care of her like a child for 3 years, and she just threw us out on the street, and that's even though she has a lot of money and a huge house. Raymond also did not hide his indignation when talking to old acquaintances from Houston. Yes, imagine that. I heard his voice from the living room. My own mother, her only son, and she kicks me out like a stranger. Apparently, old age does not suit people, making them selfish and vindictive. These conversations did not upset me. On the contrary, they confirmed once again that my decision was correct. Even now, when they should have been thinking about their own mistakes, they continued to blame me for all their problems. I received unexpected support from my neighbors. Mrs. Parker, our neighbor on the left, who had previously been cool toward me, suddenly began to visit for tea. At first, I was surprised by such attention, but soon I understood the reason. Marjorie, I have something to tell you, she confessed one day, sitting in my living room and nervously stirring sugar in her cup. George and I have long thought that you spoil your son and his wife too much. It seemed that they were taking advantage of your kindness. I waited for her to gather her thoughts. But yesterday, I overheard Tracy talking on the phone in the garden, Mrs. Parker continued. She was telling someone that you had been living off your pension for 3 years, that you had demanded complete control over your finances. Is that true? I nodded without going into details. My goodness, the elderly woman shook her head. And we thought you were just a capricious old lady who was dissatisfied with her family's care. Forgive us, Marjorie. It gradually became clear that the neighbors had long noticed strange behavior in my household, but did not dare to interfere in family affairs. Mr. Adams, who lived across the street, said he had seen Raymond sleeping on the porch in the middle of the day instead of looking for work. The young couple on the right complained about the loud music Raymond and Tracy played in the evenings, regardless of the fact that they had a small child. We knew something was wrong with them, Mrs. Rodriguez told me when she met me at the mailbox, but we thought it was a family matter that outsiders shouldn't get involved in. Now that the truth had come out, my neighbors treated me with sympathy and understanding. They offered to help with shopping, asked how I was feeling, and invited me over for tea. I realized that all these years I hadn't been as lonely as I thought. Meanwhile, Raymond and Tracy were slowly but surely preparing to leave. They took their time looking for a place to live, apparently hoping that I would change my mind at the last minute. Only a week before the deadline did they begin actively packing their belongings and making phone calls. I watched as they packed clothes, books, and kitchen utensils they had bought with my money into boxes. They tried to take some things secretly, expensive dishes that were a gift from Harold, small appliances that had been purchased recently. When I noticed that the coffee maker was missing, I had to search their belongings. What does this mean? Tracy protested when I found the coffee maker in one of their boxes. Don't you trust us? After everything that's happened, trust has to be earned again, I replied calmly. And that coffee maker was bought for the house, not for you personally. Raymond tried to look offended. Mom, it's nothing. Are you really going to begrudge your son an old coffee maker? I'm not begrudging the coffee maker, I explained. I don't like that you're trying to take someone else's property without permission. In the end, I had to make a list of the things they could take and what would remain in the house. It was humiliating for all of us, but necessary. Otherwise, they would have taken half the furniture. A few days before their departure, they finally found temporary accommodation, a room in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Tracy got a low-paying job at a beauty salon, and Raymond got a job as a warehouse loader. The work was hard and not prestigious, but it provided at least some money to live on. Are you happy? Raymond asked me grimly, showing me his employment contract. Your son will be carrying boxes like a simple laborer. I hope you're proud of the results of your parenting. I'm proud that you've finally taken responsibility for your life, I replied. Any honest work is better than being a freeloader. In recent days, their behavior had become openly hostile. They pointedly refused to greet me, slammed doors, and played music at full volume. Tracy accidentally spilled coffee on the kitchen table several times, and Raymond forgot to turn off the tap in the bathroom, causing water to spill onto the floor. The day before I left, I heard their conversation through the thin wall. They were making plans for revenge, discussing ways to make me regret my decision. We'll see how she sings when she's on her own, Tracy said maliciously. The first winter will show her what it's like to live without the support of her family, and there are legal ways to get what belongs to us, Raymond added. I talked to a lawyer. If we can prove that our mother is misusing funds or unable to care for herself, we can get custody. And then we'll return to this house as its rightful owners, Tracy said dreamily. These words didn't scare me, but they made me more cautious. I knew that the war would not end with their departure. They would look for ways to return and take revenge. On their last morning, they loaded their belongings into a rented truck without saying goodbye or expressing any gratitude for the 3 years they had lived there. Raymond slammed the door demonstratively, and Tracy, getting into the car, shouted, "Don't think this is the end. We'll be back." I stood at the window and watched the truck disappear around the bend. The house around me was filled with silence, not empty and oppressive, as I had expected, but calm and peaceful. For the first time in 3 years, I was the rightful mistress of my own home. The silence in the house was complete and absolute. I stood at the living room window and looked at the empty driveway where, just an hour ago, the truck with Raymond and Tracy's belongings had been parked. The sun hung high in the sky, illuminating the yard with fallen leaves that no one had cleaned up for a week. The air in the room seemed thin, as if some important component had suddenly disappeared from it. I walked through the house, checking what they had left behind and what they had taken with them. The master bedroom looked strange. The bed was made, but the pillows were rumpled. Only my clothes remained in the closet, and Tracy's cosmetics and perfumes were gone from the dressing table. Her perfume still lingered, but faintly, like a memory of her presence. The kitchen was also unusually tidy. The pile of dirty dishes that was always piled up in the sink was gone, as were the magazines and books scattered across the table. The refrigerator was half empty. They had taken the food I had bought with my money, leaving only the bare essentials. The coffee maker was in its place, washed and shiny. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to understand what I was feeling. I expected relief, the joy of liberation, but instead I felt a strange emptiness. It wasn't sadness. No, I didn't want to feel sad about Raymond and Tracy. Rather, it was bewilderment at how quickly the house had come to seem large and silent. The phone rang around noon, and I jumped in surprise. It was Mrs. Parker, asking how I was doing and if I needed any help. Her voice sounded sympathetic, but I could also hear curiosity in it. The neighbors had obviously seen the truck leave and wanted to know the details. "Thank you, Dorothy. Everything is fine," I replied, trying to sound cheerful. "They found a place and moved out as planned. And you? Isn't it too quiet?" Mrs. Parker asked cautiously. It was a fair question. Indeed, the silence weighed heavily on my shoulders in an unfamiliar way. Over the past 3 years, I had grown unaccustomed to solitude, accustomed to the constant presence of other people in the house, even if those people annoyed and upset me. "I'll get used to it," I said, hearing the uncertainty in my own voice. After lunch, I tried to do the things I had been putting off for months. I sorted through the papers in Harold's study, threw out old newspapers, and went through the books in the living room. The work was a distraction, but not for long. As soon as my hands were no longer busy, my thoughts returned to what had happened. Raymond was my only child. 44 years ago, I gave birth to him in pain and joy, breastfed him, nursed him through childhood illnesses, took him to school, and was proud of his achievements. Somewhere along the way, this beloved boy turned into a stranger who saw me only as a source of money and a future inheritance. In the evening, I made dinner for one, a small portion of soup and a few slices of bread. The food seemed tasteless, but I forced myself to finish it. Then I sat in the living room, holding a book I couldn't read. The letters blurred before my eyes, and my thoughts revolved around one question: had I done the right thing? On the one hand, There was no other way out. Raymond and Tracy had gone too far with their demands and shown their true colors when it came to money. If I had given in to them then, on Saturday morning, I would have become a prisoner in my own home, dependent on their mercy and mood. On the other hand, now I was completely alone. It's not easy to start a new life at 72. Of course, I had neighbors, acquaintances, doctors, but no one really close. No one who would call just to see how I was doing. No one with whom I could share my little joys and sorrows. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang. I thought it was Mrs. Parker again, but I heard an unfamiliar female voice. Good evening. This is the Senior Care Agency. We heard that you recently became a single person and may need some help around the house. I wondered where they got that information, but then I realized that Raymond or Tracy must be spreading rumors that I can't cope with living on my own. Perhaps it was part of their plan to discredit me in front of my neighbors and acquaintances. Thank you, but I don't need any help, I politely declined. Are you sure? The woman persisted. At your age, it's very important to have constant support. We can provide a caregiver who will come several times a week. I'm doing just fine on my own, I repeated and hung up. But the call made me think about the future. Right now, I was in good physical shape and could take care of myself without outside help. But what would happen in a year, in 5 years? Sooner or later, age would take its toll, and then I would need someone's help. Only now it would be hired help, not relatives. I didn't sleep well that night. The house seemed too big, and every little noise made me jump. I was used to the sounds Raymond and Tracy made, the creaking of their bed, the sound of water in the bathroom, muffled voices from the TV. Now there was only silence, broken occasionally by the hum of the refrigerator or the ticking of the clock. In the morning, Raymond called. I hesitated to pick up the phone, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom, he said dryly, without his usual greetings. I'm calling to give you our new address and phone number, in case something happens. He dictated the address of the motel and the room number. His voice sounded tired without his usual aggression, but also without warmth. How are you? I asked, without knowing why. How can people who have been kicked out of their home be doing? He replied bitterly. We're living in a room the size of a storage closet, working ourselves to the bone for pennies. Tracy cries every day. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. I didn't want to sympathize with them. They had brought the situation upon themselves, but it was also wrong to rejoice in their misfortune. Mom, Raymond continued after a pause, if you change your mind, we're ready to come back, on any terms. I won't change my mind, I said firmly. I see, he sighed. Goodbye then. I hope you'll be happy in your empty house. He hung up, and I realized that the connection between us was finally broken. He would no longer call, visit, or ask about my health. I had lost my son as completely as I had once lost my husband. Only Harold had been taken by death, and Raymond by his own greed and irresponsibility. The day passed with small household chores. I cleaned the house, made lunch, watered the flowers on the windowsill. By evening, it became clear that this was my new life, measured, calm, lonely, without drama or scandal, but also without human warmth. No constant anxiety about money, but also no illusions about family ties. As I went to bed, I thought that I had made the only possible choice. There was no other way, either to preserve my dignity and remain alone, or to turn into a spineless old woman under the control of greedy relatives. The choice was painful, but it was the right one. The house quieted down around me, preparing for a long autumn night. The wind rustled outside the window, a dog barked somewhere, and rare cars drove by. Life went on as usual, and I was part of it, lonely but free,